on today's World Insight with Jian Wei. Protection of intellectual property rights. How far has China gone? The lowdown from the World Intellectual Property Office Chief.
It shows that China and the United States are a long way out in front.
And what defines current relations between China and the U.S.? The big picture from an international relations scholar.
And here's our host, Jian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you from Beijing on CGTN. We begin with the protection of intellectual property rights in China. Global trade and investment can take place smoothly under a policy of well-protected IPR. China's efforts to keep improving its IPR system, along with carrying out laws to spur innovation, have so far gained recognition. Despite trade protectionism in the name of IP protection in some countries, China's own intellectual property policy have made progress.
China's intellectual property protection grows in scope and in breadth. The State Council on Wednesday made public a regulation seeking to build a better business environment. It released a decree signed by Premier Li Keqiang that will become effective from January 1st, 2020. The regulation covers IPR protection through a punitive damage system, a fast response collaborative mechanism, and a dispute settlement mechanism. In the past few years, China has been building a good environment for IPR protection through the letter of the law. Both domestic and foreign applicants have recognized these efforts. Data for 2018 from China's National Intellectual Property Administration showed a 5.8% jump in domestic invention patent grants for the past year. At the same time, valid local trademark registrations increased nearly 33%. International players have filed more patent applications in China as well. China saw 148,000 foreign invention patent applications in 2018, a 9.1% increase over the previous year. Foreign trademark applications saw a 16.5% rise, with 244,000 for the year. The quality of patents and trademarks is also strictly controlled. In the first half of the year, China's local people's courts wrapped up more than 150,000 first-instance IPR civil cases, an increase of 80% year-on-year, and more than 2,000 first-instance cases involving IPR infringement, an increase of about 23% year-on-year. So far, China has pursued practical guidelines for patent applications in the United States, Japan, Brazil, India, and other countries for enterprises, and signed patent examination cooperation agreements with 28 countries. It's the tipping point of the evolution of IP protection in China.
So how far has China gone in protecting intellectual property? No one knows better than the Director General of the United Nations World Intellectual Property Organization, tasked with making global IPR policies. Let's listen in my exclusive interview with him. We have a lot of issues to discuss today. Mr. Director General, China issued its first patent law 1985 now. Time flies. How much do you think this country has made its progress so far?
I think the patent law was passed in 1984, the first patent in 1985. And now if we look at the world in 2018, last year, there were 3.3 million patent applications filed all around the world, and 1.54 million of those, 46%, were filed in China. So this is remarkable. It's the largest patent office in the world, also trademark office, also design office. So the building of an infrastructure to cope with the demand of a burgeoning economy that is increasingly adding value in terms of knowledge and intangible assets, it's a remarkable thing that we should acknowledge, and it's been extraordinarily well done in my view.
Besides the sheer number, what are some of the things with the Chinese progress or with the Chinese way of try to approach this issue that you think can be inspiring or used as reference to the other parts of the world? I mean, after all, this is the largest developing country.
Yes, indeed. So look, I would say, if I may, first of all, there is something that has been present constantly in China, and that is a strategic focus from the top. And we see it, of course, with President Xi Jinping, who has a very big strategic focus on innovation and on intellectual property as a part of innovation. I mean, I think we always must remember that the reason we have intellectual property is to promote innovation, to ensure a safe passage for ideas through to the marketplace. So this is one lesson for, I think, everyone, is having this focus and support of the leadership means that the whole system can adapt to embrace the idea of intellectual property. Then I think that is combined with a very pragmatic approach of ensuring that actually the mechanics of the system function. So we've seen that, I mean, as I mentioned just a moment ago, 1.54 million patent applications, about 7 million trademark applications.
Actually, I'm amazed that, by the way, you can remember all these numbers about every country, China included.
But getting through those, you know, and getting through them in a timely manner that serves the market and with quality, that's quite a task. And then building the outreach in this extremely large and diverse country, getting the buy-in to the system. These are all lessons, I think, for everyone.
The top-down approach, of course, is sometimes quite unique to China. But how much inspirations do you think China has also acquired from the rest of the world?
My observation is that China studies very carefully practices in other countries around the world, absorbs them, and comes out with its own version of them. This studied approach is, I think, admirable. It's a very open approach.
What do you mean by open approach?
Well, it's open to listening to others and to studying what others have been doing.
Who are the others you're referring to?
Usually study visits to Europe, to various European countries, the United States of America, to all other countries within the Asian region, and of course increasingly China has a leading position in this area. But that has been the case since the beginning, and you mentioned, you know, the beginnings, rather recent beginnings of the modern era of intellectual property.
Mr. Director General, in your position, you know probably better than anybody else about the debate about globalization, this and that. So what about that multilateral system for intellectual property, now already existing and to be innovated for the near future? How much role do you think China can and has been, and where is it going from here?
To some extent, I think that's normal. I think it's normal in the sense, in several senses. First, the whole evolution of our economy is an evolution towards an economy where there is value is increasingly in what we call intangible assets, or it's in ideas, in technology, in brands. Increasingly this is the case. So it's normal there's more tension around those items and more attention paid to those items. Then, of course, we see changing strategic positions and changing positions of leadership, and there's always tension about that. So I think if we look at it historically, we can see there's an element of this which one might expect to take place. Not normal in the sense of good, but normal in the sense, well, it's not unexpected. Now, let's look at those tensions and what it means for the multilateral system. I think it's extremely important that we have a system that allows ideas and technology to flow freely internationally. And actually intellectual property is a good vehicle for that, because it's a good vehicle for trading in ideas and technology. This is extremely important. Why? Because we have enormous technological gaps in the world. And technology is the great divider. So we need to have an international approach to these matters to ensure that there are free flows of technology and there are not blockages. the current trade tensions that we see, well, this is a bilateral matter on which I can't comment, but
there are so many bilateral matters about trade these days, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's not just between the largest and the second largest. It's also between the largest and many others.
That's right. So, and I think, you know, there's in international relations, we always learn to students the old African proverb that when two elephants fight, it's the grass that gets hurt. And so everyone is...
A lot.
Everyone is interested in this and the outcome of this. And ensuring a good outcome. But tension, that it's not unexpected is one thing, but it must result in, you know, we must reach a good basis for this in which globalization can prosper. Because, you know, we're at a stage in our evolution where I don't think it's possible to turn back globalization. It's not possible. We can't de-globalize, even though there are important pressures in this regard. We can't, because we have technologies of connection. All of our technologies of telecommunication, of the internet, of digital technologies, they're all connecting us more and more. And so we have to have a good system for that connection.
Yeah. How do you see the possibility, as some has been rhetorically talking about, so-called decoupling, whether it's science and technology or the rules, because you talked very much about this global flow of ideas. It's crucial to narrow the divide. Do you think the so-called decouple thing likely to happen? I'm not referring to specific countries, but rather as an idea. Going to happen with us?
You mean decoupling of?
Decoupling of scientific and technological interactions, coordination, collaboration. You see that at research level. You see that at business level. You also see that at consumer level. So what do you think about, you know...
I think it's a very bad thing. We are connected, and you can't uncouple and disconnect us. You can't do that unless you unplug the whole internet, unless you stop aeroplanes flying, unless you stop ships sailing or navigating, unless you stop people traveling. We can't. We now are at a stage where we are connected. So we have to make a good system for that connection, which is built upon understanding. And those connections should actually help our understanding. I don't think the problem is with human beings. You know, human beings, you travel and you like them wherever they are and in whatever country. That's not the problem. The problem is these strange ideas that come along.
Mr. Director General, now there has been a lot of talk about how to reform and innovate the international governance system. Those debates are going on every part of the world. How do you think, when it comes to the understanding of intellectual property protection and the shared vision of this important cause, can be maintained and developed for the near future from your perspective? And what role, really, can China, for example, as the largest developing country, play in this regard?
You know, we all are conscious that the current form of multilateral cooperation was invented 70 years ago. It's a long time. We need to be conscious of that, and reforms are always needed. Now, more dangerous, however, is the attack on the idea of international cooperation. You know, what is technology? It's an expression of our need. So there is a need for interconnection, I think, that has been fulfilled by technology. Now there we have to be, I think, extremely careful. And China has an extremely important role to play, if I may say, in my view, in supporting the international system, in supporting an international approach. Now, international approaches are not always convenient for an individual country because you cannot get your own way completely. You have to compromise and listen and be attentive to the interests of others, and at the end come out with something that's going to suit everyone. There are many tensions here. I think we have to pay a lot of attention to it to ensure that you know, we have a world that is an open world, and I think you construct peace on the basis of this bottom-up approach of enabling human beings to connect with each other.
what are likely to be the areas that you think is urgently on your agenda? And you and the member countries of WIPO will be able to work on. What are the challenges that you're having right now to bring them on board?
I think the area of challenge is rulemaking. We've never had such interest in the organization before, and many things are going extremely well. The demand for intellectual property rights in our systems, the number of countries acceding to our treaties. But making new rules in this environment about which we've been speaking is more difficult. Now there, I think we are facing a very challenging situation because we need those rules. Because these technologies operate internationally. Now, a good example is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence has been made a strategic capability by quite a number of countries. You know, China, United States, Japan, Germany, European Union, Russia, all have identified artificial intelligence as a needed strategic capability for the future, and we see this transition in the economy. There are questions there that concern intellectual property because artificial intelligence relies on data. And we don't have an easy regulatory framework for data. Take medical data. Whose data is it? Is it the patients? Is it the doctors? Is it the hospitals? Is it the national health systems? This is a very fundamental question, and it's at the base of it a property question, intellectual property question. But it's not just, you know, medical data, it's all forms of data we have here. So this is, I think, a big challenge, and it's a big challenge also because there are many different policy dimensions to this. There's personal protection, protection of personal data privacy, there's security, there's integrity of data, the fake news question, but there's also property. And we are focusing now on trying to formulate the right questions from the intellectual property point of view for artificial intelligence and data. So it's only, I think, we're only at the stage of trying to identify the right questions. We don't have any answers, but we need to start. We won't get to the answers unless we have good questions.
Yes, indeed. But you know, the technologies are developing very fast. So it's always the case, history-wise, that policy making and correlations would fall back behind the technology, the development. It's always the case. But how fast can we catch up this time? Because it seems that it's going to have a much bigger impact, as we see today, on people's lives.
Yeah, I think we need everyone involved, not just states. Of course, states, you know, retain the ultimate right to make a rule. But the input into the making of the rule has to involve everyone. A good example is scientists. We need the involvement of scientists. They're the ones who know about this. Yeah. You know, it's not just the business people. We need the business people also. They're the ones applying the science in technology, in the economy, in practices. But we need the scientists so that we can ultimately arrive at the right questions and then the right answers. However, there is this lag always, as you had said, you know, between what's happened and the formulation of a rule. And that's a bit worrying because the technologies are radical.
You know, Mr. Director General, intellectual property is a grand idea. There are so many things related to it. But at the same time, there are concepts that people got mixed up with it. For example, some see the debates going on about several ideas. You know, what to do when you have an acquisition of business with the intellectual property or with the IP. As a result of this acquisition. For example, what to do in trade when IP is being involved, what to do with foreign investment when IP is involved, what to do with licensing when IP is involved, what to do with all of these international resources sharing, or what to do with all the open sources on the internet or elsewhere in the world when it comes to IP protection. These are all different areas. But it's not necessarily intellectual property itself. But there are a lot of mix of ideas these days.
Yeah,
so
right.
From the expert, we should learn something about how to identify what is real intellectual property protection, what are some important ideas.
So I think that intellectual property is really about balance. You know, it's about achieving a balance between all of the competing interests that surround innovation or creativity. And there are the interests of the innovator, the investor in the innovation, But there are the interests of the public as well. So it's really about balance and us getting the right balance between the free flow of ideas and then some temporary monopolies, if you like, on the commercial exploitation of certain ideas in order to create the right economic incentive structure for investment in the creation of new ideas. Because there's no flowing of ideas if you don't have ideas. So you need to have an incentive structure for creating new ideas. So I think this is what it's all about. Now when you come to the various areas that you've mentioned, okay, a lot of people say, well, look at some of these enterprises that are going and buying other companies for technology. Why else would you buy the company? Of course you're
That's
doing
one
that.
of the reasons why you buy the company,
That's
especially
right.
these days in the world.
That's right, exactly. Where you buy another company, or you take over another company because it has something of value that you want to acquire. And increasingly, as we discussed earlier, that value is intellectual property or technology and innovation.
The most thing you hate, I would guess, is misinformation.
Yes, I think misinformation is our biggest problem.
How would you be able to work with the others, your member countries as well, be able to reduce at least the amount of misinformation, whether it's about between countries, between cultures, or in the market? How?
Look, what we try to do in our sphere, little sphere, is to encourage as much empirical data. To get the data out there so that we have actually a factual discussion. A lot of people like fact-free discussions.
That seems to be the trend of sometimes today's world, yes. Unfortunately.
So we are trying to get, through economic and statistical studies, a factual basis out there. For example, we did in the field of artificial intelligence, we looked at all scientific publications and patent applications since the 1950s. Very interesting, the results. It shows that China and the United States are a long way out in front.
Mr. Director General, what a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for taking your time out of your very busy schedule here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
It's my pleasure.
Director General of WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization, in an exclusive interview with CGTN.